And in this book review, I'm going to be talking about the thoughts and emotions that came up for me when I was reading this book. This book unfolds as a series of visits between the author Mitch Albom and his sociology professor Morrie Schwartz. Many years after he graduated, Mitch comes back into Morrie's life because he learns that his professor was diagnosed with ALS and was in the late stages of the disease. He was essentially dying. So this is a series of conversations between these two men. They meet weekly on a Tuesday, hence the title of this book, Tuesdays with Morrie. This book is very short and it's written in a way that is really easy to read. I probably could have read this in a day if I wanted to, but instead I decided to take my time with it and read a couple of chapters a day. The chapters are very short, and at the end of each chapter there's a vignette, mostly representing flashbacks, but also there are some other little nuggets in there. I found that the vignettes really benefited from having a pause in between, so what I ended up doing was reading a chapter or two a day. This tiny book did take me 2 weeks to read, but it was definitely well worth the time. Of course, this is a story about Morrie, but it's also a story about the author Mitch, and I actually found myself identifying with a lot of his characteristics in terms of being hyper-focused on money and career earlier in his life. So I guess it would be in his 20s and 30s, similar to my journey. And then when he rekindles this relationship with his professor, he learns all sorts of lessons about life. Now, these are all lessons that we've heard before. There's really nothing new in this book. I'll touch on some of these lessons, but they are very familiar things that we've pretty much all heard before. And I think that's the interesting thing about this book. It's really easy to dismiss this book and the lessons therein because we've heard them before, because they've almost become cliched. But how many of us actually live in alignment with these things that we say we know already? So for example, how many of us has heard that money isn't everything, money doesn't bring happiness? And while of course money is important to a certain extent, we all need money to survive. How many of us spend our time making money to buy things we don't actually need or want? And sometimes this comes at the expense of happiness in other areas of our life. Likewise, how many times have we heard about the importance of being compassionate to our fellow humans? Yet many of us are still quick to judge people who are different from us, and I'm not excluding myself from this category by any means. Being compassionate to my fellow humans is definitely something that I hear all the time, something that I want to internalize and that I feel for the most part, but I'm still not perfect at it. And this book reminded me of areas where I still have a lot of work to do. And finally, not to be morbid, but how many of us have heard that life is short and we're all going to die? Sometimes knowing this gives us the perspective that we need, but most times it fades into the background. And how many of us are actually at peace with the fact that we're going to die? These are 3 examples of the lessons that are included in this book. And again, they are familiar lessons. These are also lessons I've been trying to integrate into my own life, but I'm not quite there yet. There are still times where I worry too much about money, or I worry that I don't have enough, or I chase money because I think that will make me feel more safe. There are also times where I still judge myself and the people around me because I have a very harsh inner critic. And there are times where I don't have that big picture perspective of life is short and one day I'm no longer going to be here. I worry, or I'm self-conscious, or I feel guilt or shame about little details that don't really matter in the grand scheme of things. Up until this point, everything that I've talked about I was pretty much expecting when I was reading this book, because I have been working on letting go of a lot and changing my mindset about a lot of things. But what came up for me that was surprising was my fear around growing old, falling ill, and losing my independence. This brought up a lot of thoughts and emotions within me, and I felt very uncomfortable as I was reading about the progression of Morrie's disease. I could feel Mitch's discomfort, and even as he grew and changed within this book, and he got more comfortable with it, I got less comfortable with it, because I don't know if I have it in me to be in either of their situations. If I were in Morrie's situation, if I was dying of a terminal disease, would my ego allow me to receive help so graciously? And would I have it in me to give my time and attention to my loved ones as graciously as Morrie did? And if I were in Mitch's position, would I take the time to sit by someone's side in their final days? And if they were trying to impart wisdom to me, would I receive these lessons with grace, even if I've heard them all before? One day I might be in that situation, either in Morrie's situation where I'm dying of a terminal disease, or in Mitch's situation where someone I deeply care about is dying of a terminal disease. I honestly don't know how I would react in terms of my behavior, if I would be present or if I would shut down, but this book did give me some hope because, again, I identified with a lot of Mitch's characteristics. If he can change and if he can grow to be comfortable in very uncomfortable situations and be vulnerable where he might have put up a wall before, then maybe I can too. I'm going to close with my favorite part of this book because it really shows how I'm trying to live my life right now. This entire book was well worth the read, but my favorite part is towards the end of the book when Mitch asks Morrie what he would do if he had one day perfectly healthy. Morrie proceeds to answer with some very ordinary things that he would enjoy. Get up in the morning, do his exercises, have a lovely breakfast of sweet rolls and tea, go for a swim, have his friends come over for a nice lunch. Then he'd go for a walk, and in the evening they'd all go to a restaurant together, have some great food, and dance the rest of the night. Then he'd go home and go to sleep. After hearing that, Mitch asks, "That's it?" And Morrie says, "That's it." Mitch goes on to write, "It was so simple, so average. I was actually a little disappointed. I figured he'd fly to Italy or have lunch with the president or romp on the seashore or try every exotic thing he could think of. After all these months lying there, unable to move a leg or a foot, how could he find perfection in such an average day?" Then I realized this was the whole point. Sometimes I look back to my 20s and 30s when I was buying really extravagant things, going on nice vacations, having fancy dinners, and I think that my life now, from an outside perspective, might seem like I regressed or that my life trajectory went down, but inside I feel so much happier and more joyful, and I know that my trajectory is actually going up. This is something that means a lot to me, which is why I like to highlight the simple things. I want to share the message that you don't need big, extravagant, exciting things to have a meaningful life. This book did teach me things that I already knew, but they are still important lessons. The biggest one of all is that one day I might be too sick or too frail to go for a walk, to go to the movies with my husband, to dance in the kitchen while cooking. So why not enjoy these things now? A lot of people say to travel while you're still young so you can enjoy yourself. While I do agree with the overall premise, if you want to travel, I say do it now. I also think we need to enjoy the simple and ordinary pleasures while we still can. That is going to be it for my review of Tuesdays with Morrie. If you haven't read this book, I do highly recommend it, if it's something that catches your interest, of course. Whether you read it in a day or over a couple of weeks like I did, try to notice the thoughts and emotions that arise. What can you learn about yourself? And what lessons do you want to keep close to you as you continue to change and grow? Thank you all so much for watching my very first book review. I hope you enjoyed the video. I will be experimenting with this format for 2024 at least, and I'll see how it goes. If it works out well, I'll continue with them. If not, I'll move on to other topics. If you've read Tuesdays with Morrie, I would love to hear your thoughts. Even if you didn't enjoy it, even if you found the advice to be very commonplace, I would still like to hear from you. Thank you again for watching, and I will see you very soon in another video. Until then, please take care, and bye for now.